Hello, and welcome back to the Bench to Bourbon podcast. I am, as always, your host, Cynthia Steele, and today's guest is my friend, Dr. Erin Zook. So, Erin and I met when she was a technician in a laboratory on the same floor as me, where I was working as a technician at Loyola University, Chicago. Erin then went on to get her PhD in immunology from Loyola and did a postdoc at the University of Chicago, at which point she ended up switching from academics to industry. And she is currently the director of medical affairs at BD in surgical. And Erin and I just have a wonderful conversation. It seems like we kept coming back to two themes. One is stretching yourself outside your comfort zone and the importance of doing that both from a scientific perspective and product development perspective, but also for your own personal growth and career development. And the other thing that we seem to come back to all the time was how the things that we learned in grad school do keep coming back and helping us in the future, whether it's solving a problem, answering a question, identifying research gaps, project management, you name it. So the things we learn in grad school, it's kind of like the things we learn in kindergarten, right? They do come back and they help us out later on in life. So enjoy my interview with Dr. Erin Zook. Dr. Erin Zook, welcome to the Bench to Boardroom podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
I'm so excited to see you, and we'll get to how we know each other in a minute. But before we get to any of the real fun stuff, why don't you introduce yourself to our guests?
Well, for those who are listening in, my name is Erin Zook. I'm Director of Medical Affairs at Becton Dickinson and Company, working in their surgery division.
Very cool. Very cool. So I met you, I think at the time we were both working as technicians at Loyola University Medical Center. I was taking a gap year between my first 2 years of graduate school, and then I worked as a technician before finishing my PhD. And you were right out of undergrad, weren't you?
Yes, I joined Loyola as a research technician, as you mentioned. I had taken a year before working as a research technician after doing my undergraduate, and I did a year of AmeriCorps. So I don't know if you're familiar with the AmeriCorps program,
No, tell
but
me.
it's about a year of service. It's just volunteering a year of your time, giving back to communities. So after undergraduate, I did a year with the American Red Cross, teaching like safety and health education classes to the Chicago community. That was my gap between undergraduate and like trying to figure out what's next in life.
Mm-hmm.
And I can share more about why that gap happened. But during that process, I knew I wanted to get into research. And so I got back into research through Loyola as a research technician.
Very nice. Were you always interested in immunology?
So I wasn't always interested in immunology. And as an undergraduate, I was a biology major. So I thought I was going to go to med school. Well, I was,
Same.
on the, yeah, that's how a lot of us start, right?
Totally.
Um, you like science, you
You like
go
the
to
body.
college. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, well, what do you do in science? Okay, you go to med school. So I was at the University of Illinois as a biology major, took the MCATs on the med school track. It was my last year at university where I started volunteering in a research lab. Um, Again, thinking this is going to be great experience when I apply to med school. They like to see research volunteer experience. So
Mm-hmm.
started working in a lab with Drosophila and genetics and really found my people, if that makes sense.
Totally.
Different group of individuals, they were asking the same types of questions I was asking, like more about, what is this mechanism? Why is this happening? Not
Mm-hmm.
just, here's a disease treatment, but like, why does this treatment work for some people and not other people?
Totally.
So different types of questions is what I was experiencing. And then I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
I found my people. Like, this
Yeah.
is I love research. They're thinking more similarly to what I was kind of thinking. I was getting excited. So
Mhm.
that's obviously what kind of led to that gap year, where I worked with the American Red Cross for a year, because at that point I decided I'm not applying to med school. So what am I going to
Mhm.
do?
Yeah.
That's what led me to like a year of volunteer service with AmeriCorps. And then when that ended, I was trying to figure out, okay, how do I start a career in research?
Yeah.
Uh, and then that's when I started working at Loyola. I joined a lab at Loyola that happened to be an immunology lab. I had taken immunology as an undergraduate, which
Mhm.
not a lot of people do.
That's
Um,
impressive. I didn't. I didn't take immunology until my first year of grad school.
Yeah, and I think it shaped my career more than I realized.
Okay.
It was one of those advanced, like 300 level classes. I didn't have the prereqs for it, but I had a friend who was like, I hear this professor is amazing. He's going to be retiring. I'm going to take the class. I emailed the professor saying, I don't have the prereqs. Do you recommend I still take the class? Pure silence. So I decided to sign up anyways.
Oh my gosh.
It was a graduate school class. Like they had graduate students who were also taking this 300 level class. The exams were what you and I received in graduate school. It was, here's a scientific abstract. We're going to ask you questions and you're going to hypothesize and write responses. It wasn't multiple choice.
Oh my
There
god.
were no slides. There was an overhead projector where he would just doodle. Um, it was probably one of the toughest classes I took, but
It
it
sounds like
was obviously it shaped my life for me becoming an immunologist and left an
yeah.
impression. I mean, after probably hours and hours of crying over the class, but
Once you got over the trauma, it
yeah,
really
once you got over that. So when I saw, a research position in immunology, I'm like, well, I know immunology. I've taken a class on it, and not a lot of people had. So
yeah.
that helped me get that position. And I think it also definitely helped in graduate school when most of us were getting immunology for the first time.
And we
I
were
felt
crying about it then.
it's true. So
The head professor in that immunology program made me cry. She made, and when I say she, you're going to know exactly who I'm talking about.
I know
She made every person in that class cry. Boys, girls, didn't matter. We all wept at one point.
it is true. I look back very fondly though. Like, I mean, I think graduate school is a tough time in our lives. It was
Big time.
definitely tough for me. I think there's many of times you can talk to my advisor and he'll tell you times that he probably remembers me crying. We keep in touch and we still talk now, but
Were you
it
really?
is, yeah, yeah.
Oh my
We text. We were just texting like a week ago. So
God, that's
I still
amazing.
I went to an immunology conference this year. I met up. I saw a lot of old Loyola faculty that we know. I saw
Hmm.
my advisor. So despite all of the tears and graduate student struggles, I look back at it with a different light, respect, fondness,
Sure.
and it was still a good experience. It was a great experience.
Mm. We're so, you never realize it at the time, obviously, but now in retrospect, you think about like we were all so young,
Yeah,
especially, if people didn't take a gap year, you start grad school, you're like 22, 23 years old. You're so young. A lot of people are living in the city for the first time. They're living away from home.
yeah,
People are getting married, they're having kids, and all kinds of things are happening. I mean, I remember one of the ladies in our fellow grad students in the program was like in labor during her histology exam. I mean, there's so much that happens at that time of life, and it kind of blows my mind now to think about how you just do it, right? I mean, you just kind of take everything that comes at you and you just manage it and keep your head down, keep studying, keep working.
yeah. And I think we're young and we're learning life and
Yeah.
seeing things for the first time, and even in undergraduate when you're studying and you're learning, it's a different learning experience, or at least it was for me, than
Hmm.
when you go to graduate school. And they really challenge you, and they challenge you in a way with questions and more questions and
Hmm.
more questions, and the pressure is different, but I
Mm,
also feel that it's also helps us like develop that thicker scientific skin, if you know what I mean. I don't
yeah.
think I had that before graduate school.
Oh, no.
Hence, like some of the tears and the crying and those things that we experience. But you really learn to take feedback, take scientific critique, which is not bad. It's not against you
Not
personally, but it's
personal.
part of science and now part of our lives and our careers.
It's better to get those kinds of tough questions from your advisor, your lab, members of your committee, compared to some anonymous person tearing your grant to pieces. You
Yeah.
know, you have to start with friendly fire before you're really able to deal with hostile warfare, right?
Yeah, and not just in like academia, but really anywhere you go where you want to stay in science, because we should be questioning dogmas. We should be questioning like what we know to be true, because what we thought was true a while ago is not necessarily true today. It may not be true what we know today, tomorrow, or in the future. So
That is
it
so true.
we can't always just be comfortable. So I don't know. So I guess like you said, it's just getting that questioning, learning that from friendly fire, because if you want to stay in science, it's what we should be doing. We should continue to question each other.
And I like how you said that because I've actually been thinking a lot about comfort zones lately, because of this like big hiking trip that my husband and I took that I was just like very, very nervous about for a while because that's just very outside my comfort zone. But how you said, like we can't just be comfortable. You
Mhm.
should be stretching a little bit more. You should be pushing a little bit more. You should be around people who will encourage you to think outside the box or try something a little bit different, because otherwise, how else are we going to get the next generation of therapeutics or diagnostics, anything along those lines, if we don't try to stretch boundaries a little bit more?
I totally agree. I think that that's what propels a lot of us forward in science in our careers.
Yeah.
And
What if we could?
what if we could? What if we could? Yeah.
Wouldn't that
That's
be awesome?
and that's where a lot of like the innovation stems from.
Hmm.
It's just that type of mentality, that type of thinking, and again, it's the innovation that's going to change, every day and move us
Right.
forward. So yeah.
Agreed. So back to grad school, because I ask everybody this question on those really tough days when young Erin Zook was in tears. What did you fantasize about just leaving and doing instead?
So I have to admit, I don't know if I really dreamt about leaving for another career so
Okay,
much as dreaming about winning the lottery. And, like,
I like that. That's a good answer.
but but I have thought about it because one of my first interviews in industry, one of the off the wall kind of questions I got was, if you weren't a scientist,
Hmm.
what would you be doing with your life?
Yeah, totally.
And I'm like, okay, so if I were to answer the question now, it would still be the same answer I gave back then during my first interview, which I got pushback that maybe it's still sciency. But I said I would like to train dogs, like therapy dogs. That being said, I have two dogs and they're spoiled and they don't always listen to me, so I don't think I'd be a very good trainer. But you know, we were talking about pets, and I love animals. I love dogs. I feel
Hmm.
that would be rewarding. Maybe
Yeah,
still science tangent and health tangent related, but I think that that's really cool.
I love that answer. Most people come up with some kind of a service based answer, like Sarah Sarkey said she was going to be a dog groomer,
Okay,
or
yeah,
yeah, she said, that just seemed like that's not going to be an easy job, but that's not going to be this hard,
yeah.
and I get to be with cute dogs, or one of my favorite answers, Jacqueline Duvall in one of my episodes says she was just going to like open a sandwich shop. And I've heard that a few times. One of the chair of ophthalmology at Case Western actually told me that when he was getting his PhD, he dreamt of just opening a sandwich shop because there was nowhere where he could get a good sandwich on like his broke budget. Like there was just no good cheap sandwich place. He was like, "That's it, forget it. I'm done with this. I'm just going to open that sandwich shop and I'm going to feed the other grad students." And I love that answer.
Also very service-based to feed others. So
Exactly. And because honestly, nothing bad's going to happen if you add too much mayo or mustard. Like, that's not going to destroy weeks of work. It's going to be okay.
yeah, no, and I'm a fan of both mayo and mustard, so the more the better.
There you go. Agree. So, so when you finished at Loyola, did you think that you wanted to go into industry? Because you ended up doing a postdoc at University of Chicago, and that's a pretty serious place.
Yeah, so um, when we were in graduate school, I think they're doing better around this now. I
Okay.
think in graduate school nowadays, they're bringing in other career
Hmm.
information sessions, or at least I've participated in some since I've left graduate school. But when I was in graduate school, I don't really remember anybody coming in and
Yeah.
talking about industry. It was this kind of black box. We didn't talk about it. No, nobody
A
really
shameful
understood.
secret.
Yeah, and nobody really understood it. And some of our professors and mentors that I still talk to, I don't know if they still understand all the aspects of industry. So not knowing really what else was out there, I wasn't against looking for careers in industry. I wasn't
Mhm.
against potentially pursuing a traditional academic career as we were taught when we define tradition versus alternative, which again is not the norm, and we discussed that.
Yeah.
um, so I, in attempt to try to explore opportunities out there, I did a traditional postdoc, not shutting the door one
Mhm.
way or another, but knew I still liked science. Had heard that even if you want to go into industry, a postdoc experience is
Oh, yeah.
beneficial. Full disclosure, I've hired people without a postdoc experience, so I don't
Mm.
always think it's necessary.
Okay.
I think it depends on like the role, what you're trying to do, and things like that. But I enjoyed my postdoc experience. I'm glad I did it,
Mhm.
but it wasn't really I'm 100% dedicated one way or another on my career path so much as I need time to kind of think, explore, and I know I love science. So in the meantime, I'm just going to pursue a postdoc. And it was at the University of Chicago um, where I started talking more to people who were
Mhm.
considering and applying to jobs in the Chicago area, because
Yeah.
that's where I'm based, and looking for more of the industry experience.
Mhm.
So we started talking about job interviews, we started talking about resumes, learning more about it.
Nice.
Um, I also at that time I was joined Women in Bio in the Chicago area. So there were like in-person networking events at
Yeah.
pharmaceutical companies. So going to these places, talking to people in industry, learning more about the roles that are out there.
Mhm.
Uh, I at the time I still didn't have a full understanding of all of the different roles in industry. I don't think you really grasp some of it until you're in it.
True.
But really, that kind of was my thought process in doing a postdoc, and then my experience of learning more about the different potential opportunities out there while at the University of Chicago.
And tell us more about Women in Bio.
So, yeah, so the local chapter here, I actually need to reconnect on that
Mhm.
because I joined and I was part of it for probably about 2 years.
Mhm.
And then as I got into industry, I kind of got into my position learning and
Yeah, things
it
happen.
kind of stepped back from some of the opportunities there. But I have somebody who is on my team now who's a very active member in Women in Bio.
Oh, very cool.
Um, so while I'm not a member now, there was a networking event where she's like, "You need to come. We're gonna go and we're gonna talk about, our roles at our company and what we did." So I
Mhm.
kind of started dipping my toes back into it, and so I want to get more into some of that. But really, it was just a network of women in different pharmaceutical and medical device industries
Okay.
across the Chicago area, and really doing a lot of what we were talking about when we were connecting of just a lot of what opportunities are out there. They I know that they do a lot of connections with the different industry companies here in the Chicago area.
Makes sense.
And we actually have a one of our employee like resource groups has a connection with Women in Bio, so I know that they're always doing events together. So
Nice.
it's a really great experience to learn more about different roles that are out there and what it
Mhm.
means to be in industry. Talk to people who are living it day in and day out, and also giving outreach to the community in the meantime.
That's wonderful because I think besides not being encouraged, as we talked about, our PIs and our mentors were not exactly encouraging when it came to industry-based positions. And I always like to emphasize it's not necessarily coming from a bad place. It's just, this is not something that they knew about. These were career scientists, and they had a vested interest in training us to also become career scientists, and they just didn't really know about any of the other options, which, again, we want to emphasize the alternative these days is getting an R01 and
Yeah,
getting tenure. It's the
yeah,
alternative is not going into industry. Way more
yeah.
of us do that.
100%, yeah. And I agree with you. It's not coming from a bad place. It's just like this is their career path. They're very passionate about it.
Mhm.
And it's the reason I think we didn't get exposed to industry is just because people didn't know it.
Right.
And our professors didn't know it. And as I said, I keep in touch with some of our mentors and professors, and I share some of what I do at work, on a
Mhm.
day-to-day activity. And I still think they don't necessarily understand it, but that's like I think they get it to some degree, but not as fully as the career path that they took, and that's okay.
Well,
um,
medical affairs, if I may, medical affairs is very much like this 30,000-foot view of the entire, like all aspects of the
mhm.
product, from the mechanism of action, which our mentors would be able to dive deep into every phosphorylation event, to insurance coverage and um, application of the product in however many hundreds of different clinical scenarios, and gathering all that data and looking for patterns, and everything involved in medical affairs. It's so different. It's just a different way of thinking and looking at a product, other than we did this, we answered this question, we disproved the null hypothesis, we published, and we moved on. And honestly, I wish that there was a little bit more discussion in graduate schools about the importance of thinking about what happens next.
Mhm.
If you are working on a product that you think could be translational, there really should be more communication about what else you should be thinking about. And I talk about dosing and the patient experience all the time on this podcast, because if this is an eye drop, for example, that's my world. If it's an eye
Yeah,
drop that someone's going to have to take 4 times a day, it's never going to happen.
right.
If it burns, if it like melts your cornea, you're never gonna get past like the most basic of pre-IND work.
Mhm.
So it's almost a disservice to people to just leave it at the bench and never even get people thinking about how this could potentially translate.
I agree. And I think for individuals who are thinking about careers in medical affairs, all of those things you mentioned are important to think about, but it's making that translational leap with your research of
Mhm.
what is the current workflow clinical practice? What are
Sure.
people doing today? How can we improve on that? And like you said, if you're, have a treatment that you have to do 4 times a day, 8 times a day, every hour, that might not be something that's practical
Yep.
for the way treatments work, for patients' lifestyle. So it's really understanding clinical practice and the utility of what's happening in that practice now and how to improve that along the way.
Mhm.
Because again, there could be great options out there, but if it's not practical, it's going to be very hard to
Yeah.
bring that forward.
Or if it's too expensive, it's
Too
not gonna
expensive.
happen. So after your postdoc, were you able to get some interviews through these connections that you made at UFC, or how did that start coming about?
How did that start coming about? So,
Did you just
you know, we
apply, or did you have connections?
oh, so I think mine, I did have some connections.
Mhm.
So through University of Chicago, for those who I knew who had transitioned into industry, I did lean on them for, here's my resume. How does it look? Is this like a resume that would be, would it go over well in industry? What could I improve on?
Mhm.
If I knew somebody at a company, I would ask them to, hey, can you refer me for the job? Because referrals go a long way when
Totally.
you have an open position and you have hundreds of applicants applying. If there's somebody internal within the company who has referred someone, it definitely goes a long way. Um, but a lot of the applying I was doing was more just research and cold applying, if I'm being honest, because I
Wow.
had known people who had started making that transition, but my network in industry wasn't that broad yet at the time.
Mhm.
Now, that being said, it doesn't mean that networks and connections don't matter, because I didn't know it at the time, but I later found out that with my first industry position that I obtained, the person I replaced was a former Loyola grad
Oh,
and did their dissertation in one of the immunology labs at Loyola.
oh my gosh.
So I didn't find this out until after I got the job and had been there for a few months. And I can't confirm that this person maybe saw my resume, saw a Loyola connection, saw a network connection, and pulled my resume out.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know because I didn't have the opportunity to ask, but I will say that her dissertation supervisor was one of my referrals, like, or one of my, like, hey, feel free to reach out to these people if you want to,
Wow.
learn more about me. So I
Yeah,
do think connections matter.
totally.
Again, I can't confirm that that's how I got pulled out of the pile, but
Couldn't have hurt.
it couldn't hurt. It definitely couldn't hurt, because when you know applicants who've come through, if you have an understanding of their background, their education, their experience, I mean, you can say, okay, I've been through, I know this university, I know these,
Yeah. These
professors,
people.
I know this, I know the publications in this area, I know this lab that they come out of. So you
Mhm.
start to get an idea of what kind of background that person might have, and, I think that those things can help at least get your resume pulled out of a pile and put in a smaller pile for
Oh, I
consideration.
totally agree. Do you think that's because you got your PhD in Chicago and then you continue to work in Chicago? Do you think that's a benefit to staying put? Because now, as you say, you go to a place like Estella, so you go to a place like BD or AbbVie in Chicago. They know Loyola. They know there's what, 6 or 7 major graduate schools in the Loyola area. I'm pretty in the Loyola area, Chicago. Um, I mean, they know everybody, right?
I think that there's some advantage there, but I think, and maybe you can attest to this, but I think just the industry world is small regardless.
Totally.
So I think by now, we've been in it for a while. I think I've been in industry for maybe around 10 years now. While my network in Chicago is tight, and yes, the companies here know University of Chicago, they know Loyola, they know all of the different, like, major universities here, and that says something, right?
Yeah.
But I also think that in industry, there's a lot of opportunities for movement. Like, even within companies, you have locations on the East Coast, you have locations on the West Coast. So people
Totally.
are always going, I think, back and forth in different areas.
Mhm.
And even in my short 10 years in industry, I've seen people leave and I've seen them come back and I've seen them work in other organizations and other collaborations. So I think it goes back to a thought I always had, even when we were in graduate school, is we you think science is big, but I think in the end of the day, the community is still, in some regards, small, where you never know who's going to be reviewing your grants. You never know who's going to be, seeing your resume, or maybe on an interview panel for industry, or just somebody that says, oh, yeah, I know Erin. I know this about Erin. Or
Mhm.
so it's just, don't ever burn bridges, I guess, is,
No. Oh,
like, important, because it's a big world out there, but at the same time, I think that paths always recross. So it's just, good thing to keep in mind.
you are 100% right. You never want to burn bridges. I always tell people just be nice to everybody. just be nice to everybody, because you never know who is, I don't know, who's listening. You're doing a poster presentation, you never know who that person is. Maybe they could be your next boss. They could be someone reviewing your grant or your next manuscript, or
Mhm.
they could be the person that helps you get to that next level that you want to be at. I mean, I and that's why conferences are so exhausting, because you're just on
Yeah.
all the time. You cannot. I know. Yeah, at least for me, I feel like I feel like I cannot let my guard down until I am like back in my hotel room, and like the makeup comes off and I can just, slouch finally, because you just never know who you're talking to or who you're interacting with or who's watching. And it's
And
just always so important. And just before you go on, just that point about never burning bridges, I've seen it happen. I've seen people get another option, another job available to them, and they're just so eager. And this is another thing we don't learn about as scientists. We don't learn how to quit jobs. We
that's
don't
true.
learn office etiquette. I mean, I joke all the time, but like labs are an HR nightmare. Where I did my PhD, I mean, it was all in good fun, but oh my God. I mean, an HR person would have like gotten all of us fired, like just removed from the university.
Wouldn't Yeah, wouldn't always fly in the corporate world, some of it, but
But
um,
but we don't learn how to write a good email, how to write a cover letter, how to do any of these things. And so the people that I knew who ended up burning bridges essentially quit on a dime, went to a competing company, didn't like left a voicemail, like didn't set up a meeting and have a conversation like an adult would, and give their 2 weeks, or give an opportunity for someone to get back to them, or even have the conversation about how maybe you're not happy in this position anymore. And instead it was just, the ramifications were really striking, and in a lot of ways, especially at like you're saying, these like smallish communities where like a particular disease state. Yeah, you cannot afford to burn any bridges in those areas, because the North remembers. People remember.
people people remember,
Yep.
and as you know, I've seen plenty of times just in my experience of individuals going to other companies, which is great. Maybe they go to a small startup,
Mhm.
but things get acquired.
Yes.
And then you're back with people that you knew before. And so
Mhm.
again, it's just, having the respect for, I think just having the respect for yourself, having the respect for the people you work with, goes a long way.
Yep.
And I think that is just, I mean, I think it's just common courtesy.
Hmm.
Going back to what you were saying with conferences too, of like always being on, it's exhausting, but I also think that we owe it to ourselves to, be authentic too.
Yep.
I will be 100% be who you are, like be your authentic self. Be nice, don't get me wrong. Like no matter
Unless
what,
your authentic self is terrible, then maybe don't
no,
do it.
no. But I think sometimes like, we're scientists, and I will always say that, inside I always feel like the awkward scientist. Like I am like the introvert. Sometimes things that I think are funny because I just have an odd sense of humor, a little quirky, may be like people might not always, understand like everybody's sense of humor. But I think at the end of the day, you're being nice, be respectful, and be
Hmm.
yourself, because it's we spend so much time at work that I think it's really important to, accept people for who they are, respect all the different backgrounds we come into,
Totally.
accept all of the scientific quirkiness that we all bring to the table, because these different backgrounds, experience, interactions, diversity is what makes like companies great. It's what makes work great. It's what like fosters innovation.
Yeah.
So I guess embrace that quirky scientist in you if that's who you are.
No, I completely agree with that, Erin. I would never tell anybody. I would never tell anybody otherwise. I guess what I mean by just always feeling like you have to be on is just to always try to put that best foot forward.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And definitely embrace your quirkiness. I mean, I like finding buttons around the conferences. I put my little buttons on and everything. My flair, uh, so many pieces
What
of flair.
flair?
Yeah, my office space flair. But at the same time, I guess I just always feel like I can't fully exhale and just like stop putting my best foot forward, until I'm in like a little bit more of a private place or with people that I'm just really good friends with, and I can just, kick, quite literally kick off my shoes sometimes because trying to wear heels all day at a conference is terrible, and just try to relax a little bit more. But
No,
difficult.
and I agree with that. I think after a full day of conference, even after a full day of work meetings, and now as we come out of COVID, we're back in the office. Sometimes we have more face to face all day workshops.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it's exhausting, and
Totally.
it's great. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, I enjoy meeting with people, but as I said, like I'm an introvert, so my social battery by the end of those days of full person to person communication, whether it's a conference, whether it's a workshop, it is exhausting for me. My social battery is done at
You're
the
on
end of the
low power
day.
mode.
I just want to sit in quiet. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
don't want to necessarily. Some people are the opposite. Like, I work with some people just this week, and I was having a conversation, and they were saying like how energized they are after being in a room with people and doing a workshop all day long. I'm like, that's great. I'm gonna go home, and my husband's probably gonna ask me 5 questions, and I'm gonna tell him not now. Like, I need like 45 minutes to myself just to
Mhm.
like reset, decompress, and yes.
I
And
love
like
that.
you said, kick off the shoes, take off the makeup, and just
Mhm.
sit.
Yep, I love that. So, I guess tell us about your career in medical affairs. So your first job in industry was as a researcher, correct? And then you moved on. So a lot of people ask me how that works because they worry that if they start in one department, they may end up kind of stuck in that
Yeah.
in that area. So tell us how you did it.
Yeah, sure. So, my first industry job was with Astellas,
Mhm.
and I was in their bioanalytical group.
Mhm.
So, I was really leveraged my immunology skill set. So, they were really looking for a strong immunologist who understood flow cytometry, who understood ELISAs, who understood ELISpots. And this role would be developing assays for clinical trials.
Oh, cool.
So, we have we have biomarkers, and what biomarkers should we be measuring, what time points, what are the best assays to do that, how do we develop those assays, and then teaching those assays to other groups, so that as
Mhm.
a clinical trial progresses and you go from like a phase 1 to a more global study or a phase 3, and you have like hundreds of patients and you need more people to do the assays, it's not one person anymore. So that is what first got me into more of like the clinical side of industry and research, and started my career path down medical affairs.
Mhm.
And hopefully for any of the younger scientists listening, just even that experience shows like how what we're doing in graduate school, postdocs, the assays, the troubleshooting, how those skill sets can transition very nicely into industry.
Big time.
Um, but that's how I first got familiar with like what is an NDA, what is an IND, what kind of information needs to go into these things, and
Mhm.
how do you work with people who are designing clinical studies? How do you work with people who are executing clinical studies? How are we capturing the data? What kind of database? Like all of these other questions that you
Yeah,
these are all of the positions in industry that I'm like didn't know about, right? Until you
totally.
start to get into it. So, that's when I had an opportunity to really start looking deeper into medical affairs and
Mhm.
applying more strictly into those medical affairs roles. So, leveraging those bench top skill sets that we had to get my foot in the door in industry, knowing that I wanted to eventually step away from the bench, get more into the strategy around medical affairs, the strategy around evidence, the strategy around designing clinical studies, really understanding the impact there. You mentioned it before, in medical affairs, you support these products throughout their life cycle. So,
Totally.
and you know so much about it from the mechanism of action and all of the signaling and forward, but it starts in innovation and you still support these products through life cycle management. So we have
Hmm.
products that have, been on the market for decades, but there's still evidence
Yeah.
that we generate for them. And there's a strategy behind that. And how do we maximize that evidence? You look at a global company and you're trying to go to so many different markets, so many different countries. Are you going to do a clinical study for every single one of those countries? Or is there a way
Hmm.
to streamline ways to get evidence and maximize a clinical study, which is very expensive, to get the biggest bang for your buck and use that data to get into different markets? But
Totally.
also, you are in medical affairs, as well, is that you know data is also changing. We have all these like different analytical like data captures and how is real world data being utilized. And so it's a really like interesting time, I think, in medical affairs as we just
Yeah.
think about these things. And data is in evidence and evidence-based medicine and evidence-based research of what we do. It comes from so many different pathways. It's not just clinical studies, it's preclinical, it's benchtop, it's real world, patient charts. There's just so
Yeah.
much information out there, and really having a deep understanding of all of those pathways and how to synthesize this information
Hmm.
and create the strategy to support the products. It's fun. So that's kind of my transition into medical affairs, and obviously why I'm so passionate about it.
Yeah. Well, medical affairs is fun. I always think it's so cool. And also it's a story, right? I mean, and you're describing it so well, how this one thing, this molecule, this inhibition of this one, like again, I go back to phosphorylation event, but inhibiting any of these receptors, how that can lead to this type of therapeutic outcome, but also potentially how it can lead to these side effects and
Yes.
what would be serious and what's not going to be serious. And then long term, what's that going to do to a patient clinically? Is there something else that you need to worry about? Or is there other things that you need to keep in mind, other prescriptions that need to come through in order to treat some
Hmm.
of those side effects? And then, you know, 10 years down the line, I mean, to have decades of data is a remarkable thing. But then also keeping in mind, what are your competitors doing?
Oh yeah.
Because it seems like people are always, and companies are always trying to invent these new metrics. If you don't win on efficacy, do you win on safety? If you don't win on safety, do you like short term? Do you win on safety long term? In terms of like patient satisfaction, you could do surveys for that. You could do surveys for the surgeon's experience, or the ophthalmologist's experience, doctor. There's It seems like there's just always these new metrics coming up because companies are constantly trying to one up each other. And so to have this knowledge base that starts at the cell and these subcellular events and goes all the way out, that is a tremendous power to have and a huge asset for a company. And this is
100.
fun. Fun to think of it that way.
100%. And this is why we do what we do, right? This is
Totally.
why we love medical
That's
affairs. So
totally. So then, did you? So I guess what have you dabbled in terms of medical affairs? Because most people think of medical writers and they think of MSLs. So I guess like what goes into your day to day, and what have you dabbled in?
when I first joined medical affairs, so I kind of talked about the little transition of like the benchtop research and
Mhm.
then working and being supporting clinical trials. When I first moved into like a full medical affairs role, it was more purely research than strategy at that time. Still
Okay.
very junior in industry,
Yeah.
still very junior in medical affairs. The strategy was really set at a higher leadership level, but it was here's the strategic research questions that we need to answer. How can we answer these? And
Hmm.
diving into data that's out there, diving into the literature, looking at innovations out there, looking at ways to solve it. So, again, very research heavy, which again, very translational. It doesn't
Right.
matter what type of research you're doing, but very translational for the way we approach research as graduate students, right? So understanding what makes the studies we're looking at, the innovations we're looking at, where are the questions? What are the key questions that need to be answered?
Hmm.
What makes certain studies better than others. So when you're diving into innovation and you're trying to figure out the best innovation, you're trying to understand, research that's out there. What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses of the different study designs? Again, very much what we were doing and what we learned to do during graduate school and those skill sets that we developed.
Totally.
So that was more of just like a principal medical affairs role, just very research heavy. And then as I grew my medical affairs career and started taking on more strategic roles, where again talking about more of the how are we integrating our evidence into our product development? How are we thinking about the evidence? What evidence do we need? What evidence gaps do we have? Is there other applications for this product that we haven't thought about? Are there, what are we hearing from the field? Like what's coming back to us from our customers, from our patients? What are they experiencing? Are there like other benefits? Are there other claims that we should be thinking about? There are other, any safety things we need to watch out for. So starting to pull that strategy in and how we think about our products, and like you said, like what's next for the products. It might be, that it might be expansion into other countries. It might be claims expansions. There's, as a biologist, we know sometimes that you impact one part of biology and it's a cascade effect, right? So what are the other things that could be happening, and what are the benefits? What are the safety risks? And then just taking on more of those strategic roles throughout medical affairs. So it's been more of a traditional medical affairs career journey, if I were to describe it from a strategic perspective. I didn't jump around from a medical writer to, come to more of the global medical affairs role for strategy. So much as come in and then kind of grow that strategic mindset and grow my career pathway that way. But work very closely with our medical writers, work with our MSLs, work with scientific affairs, work with clinical affairs, and just really start to understand how you started the conversation talking about this wide umbrella of what medical affairs is and how all these roles, how important they all are. There's so many different facets in there of how we support these different products, medical communication, different in KOL engagements, and it's all so important.
And I actually like how you are positing this in a way to say this is what we're naturally trained to do as scientists. You're just doing it in a different context. So
Yes.
you're looking at clinical data versus preclinical data. You're thinking about long-term ramifications of this one particular mechanism of action. You're identifying the data gaps. I mean, some of these phrases that we use, like jargon that we use in industry, it still just means the same thing. I mean, go to the literature. You have a question, you go to the literature. Who are the key players, and what are
Yep.
they doing? And then you contact that person and say, hey, we want to learn from you, or hey, we would love to visit you or have you come in and get some patient data from you. It's the exact same thing that we do in the lab. If you have a mouse model or some cells that you're working with and there's some kind of missing component to your pathway, that's a data gap. And you go to the literature and you find the people who know, and then you ask them, or you read their papers and you do your best to understand. And that it's something that Diane Bovenkamp brought up, and I think in a previous episode, and I love this, which is basically when you're applying for jobs, imagine yourself as like the CEO of your own lab. And kind of like, and I want to take it one step further, almost like the CEO of your own career. Because there's things that we do as students that we just do all the time because this is part of the job. And then it's not until you think back on it that you realize, wow, no, I have managed teams.
Yep.
I have managed budgets. I am a project manager. I do know how to identify gaps in the literature and find the key opinion leaders or the KOLs to answer these questions. You do know how to do all that. It's just taking that thinking and just shifting it a little bit.
It is, and I think that's one of the key points when talking to like younger scientists. And I love sharing whatever I can about my own career journey just so people can learn from it, right? But
Yeah, totally.
also like those skill sets, those very translational skill sets that when you're trying to jump into industry that you don't think about. You mentioned project management. time management, right? In industry, timelines, we've got deliverables, we have things that we're trying to
Yep.
execute on. Same thing in graduate school. You've got to get certain experiments done for your next committee meeting,
Yep.
and prioritization, because we know it very well in industry. We've got a lot of projects, we've got a lot of priorities. You have to know what's number one priority and how you're going to manage the to-do list.
Mhm.
But in graduate school, it's the same thing. You've got your project, and you've probably got like, five other side projects of your interest and another five side projects of your PI's
Yep.
interest,
Yep.
right? And so it's, or it might be a colleague that needs your help with some assay troubleshooting or something like that. But it's just that prioritization. So those are some of the soft skill sets that we don't normally, think about when we're trying to take that and translate it into like our next career path. But I think those are things I always tell some of the younger scientists to like highlight on your resume, put into your CV, because they are so important.
Oh, yeah.
And we don't think about it. We just think about like, how many paper publications have I
Mhm.
had? How many grants did I get? And less so of some of those other like very important skill sets that you absolutely develop
Totally.
while getting your PhD, or going through grad school.
And from an HR perspective, I mean, not necessarily every person knows how to translate what you're saying in your resume about, I know how to do all of these assays, and I have worked with these people. Not everyone can translate what that means into project management, into time management, into uh, they don't understand that corralling your committee to agree on a single time to meet is practically an act of God, or like the amount of work that it takes to even write a dissertation. A lot of that stuff doesn't translate unless you specifically say it.
100%. And that is that, like, corralling. It reminds me of the story. So when I had written my dissertation, I'm defending, and this was, I don't know if they still do this, or if things are more electronic now, but I printed out my dissertation, I put it in a 3-ring binder. This was before it went to publication and actually got pressed into like book bindings. Before my open defense, before my closed defense, I gave it to each of my committee members, got a
Mhm.
copy. The very first page, I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm going to share the story. The very first page when you open it up is, when is the committee date? When are we meeting? What is the room? And I will never forget my closed defense come, and I have one committee member who's like, where are we meeting, and what time? We just had your open defense. And I was like, well, I don't think they read. I don't think they opened up the binder with my dissertation. But like you said, that, I mean, it's just that coordination. So much goes into it. It doesn't mean people are always going to follow it, but there is like a skill set there of just planning and coordinating, and there's
Mhm.
only so much within our control. But it is, how many calendar do we have to coordinate, like, for our project meetings? I mean, there's a lot
Totally.
that goes into it.
Especially with outside committee members with totally
Yeah.
different schedules.
Yeah. Oh, and I had my outside committee member, and at this time, like, Skype and things weren't, they were just like, I don't even remember if it was Skype or what it was, but something was just starting to be introduced,
Mhm.
and trying to integrate that technology. I'm probably going on a tangent, but now I'm just going down memory lane of
Totally, right?
like how things have changed and how much time now we spend on camera,
Mhm.
in our with our project teams, because we work globally, we work across the different, states, we
Yeah.
work, different time zones, and the power of the camera, and it's just
Okay.
completely different now
Oh,
than
totally.
where we were before. But just again, memory lane of trying to remember how that experience of integrating that technology of camera
Oh,
into a meeting.
it's almost says to the listeners, maybe plant a little Easter egg in your dissertation, just to make sure that people actually did go through the whole thing and read it.
Yeah, I have to say that committee member still had some really good, challenging questions for me through my close
Mm,
defense.
mm.
Um, so I like to think, or I hope, maybe they just maybe page 1 and page 2 stuck together and they just never
Or
never
they
saw that
just got
first
to the
one.
good part.
If the
Yeah,
table of
yeah.
contents and went right to, I don't know.
I
But
don't care what it's called. They'll just take me to the data. All right.
yeah.
I can see that. So speaking of putting things in your resume and speaking of like wording it correctly, what do you look for? So when you're doing hires or when you're reviewing resumes, like what can someone do to make themselves stand out?
So this is a question I think we get a lot, right?
Sure.
When people are first trying to understand, what it looks like to transition into industry. First of all, what I like to say is, I do not want to read 99 pages of your resume or your CV. I'm sure it's very impressive. I also, my personal preference is not to read paragraphs. I
Mm,
like to have, bullet points of, kind of that introduction of like, okay, these are my kind of technical skills. If it's a technical role, these are technical skills at the front to highlight, to bullet point. But beyond the technical skills, here's some other skill sets, the project management skill sets, and highlighting that, but more in bullet form. I'm not wanting to read like essays of like a paragraph of, you copying what was in your dissertation research into there. Highlight the key points.
yep.
Always like those keywords that are in a job search. uh
Yes. Yes.
always highlight those.
Put them in.
And that's there's always certain things that I'm looking for. Like when I'm looking for somebody to fill some of the roles on my team, it's a lot of that. I need to see that this person knows how to scientifically think, critically think. What, again, going back to like what we learn in graduate school, I can teach about our products. I think that if you have the right skill set, you can learn new disease states, you can learn new areas of research.
Yes.
But those skills that we get early in our scientific career in graduate school of like how to critically think, again coming back to our earlier conversation, what are the key questions in this research I need to ask, how do you highlight that on a resume? But
Mm,
how you highlight it is very different. But being able to showcase that or have a conversation about that, when you're starting to have those interviews, I mean, those are the types of things that I'm looking for. Because as you know, graduate school isn't like a 1 year thing. And it's like, great, I know how to think scientifically, I've got it down. That is a skill set all in itself. And that's why we spend so much time in graduate school. So
right.
those are the things that I'm looking for. How do you highlight that? And some of it is through publications, but that's not all of it.
No.
You can have 20 publications, or you can have like 3 really good publications in high impact journals. So
Totally.
it's not always about the number of publications, but publications can show productivity, they can show some of your thinking, they can show collaborations.
Yeah.
What work did you do with your lab? What work did you do with other labs within your institution? But what collaborations did you have outside of your institution? Because that also speaks to how we work in industry. There's a
Mhm.
lot of collaborations that go on, both interdepartmental, cross departmental, across different organizations, across different companies. So highlighting some of those things are also, I think, important when looking at resumes.
I agree. And I guess my follow-up question would be in a lot of ways people feel like everyone that I talk to says that they're always looking for self-starters, right? We want to make sure that we have someone who's a little bit more independent, a little bit more of an independent thinker, still obviously, fits the bill and will do the tasks asked for them, but without excessive babysitting. Like, what are some of the best ways that people can communicate that is them? They are self-starters. They are able to, take a task and run with it rather than needing to be micromanaged. How can you communicate that?
I think that's a good question. I don't think we always nail it. I don't know if
Right.
you've always nailed it. I think
No.
that sometimes that's hard for managers, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
we go through these interviews and you have a shorter amount of time. But I think it's through some of the questions. That's how I like to get at it,
Uh-huh.
because you're posing a question, and it's how they address it, how they think about it.
Mhm.
Some of the questions they might have had before because they've been in this research. They're like, oh, I get that question every time. Maybe they've got a standard answer, but I don't think that that always happens, especially if you're a lot of the times in industry, you have to give a presentation, like a little symposium. I'm not a symposium, but you know what I'm
Like a
thinking of.
10-minute, 15-minute talk. Yeah.
Yeah, some of them have been like, just like a 45-minute presentation, like you
Oh, wow.
would in graduate school. You just go through your research, and it's still how, no matter what, in those circumstances, there's a question that comes up that, you can see the wheels turning. You can see, like, okay, this is new because everybody comes from a diverse perspective.
Mhm.
So the person asking the question might have something in the back of their mind about, maybe it's something the company's doing, maybe it's in a new innovation that they just read about. um, I always think that in graduate school, people would always ask, they're like, okay, here, you just did this 45-minute presentation about this phosphorylation cascade and in glaucoma. Okay,
Mhm.
how does this phosphorylation cascade impact this cell type, which is my favorite cell type, which you know probably nothing about because
Right.
all your research was over here.
Yes.
But those are the types of things that you get the wheels turning, and then you say, okay,
Mhm.
how do they take what they just presented, put it in a different application, a
Mhm.
different process, a different experience, and how do they think through that? And you don't have to get the answer right. You might not even know what the answer is, but it's just like it's those kind of connections and thought processes of, well, it could be this or it could be that. So that's kind of more of like getting at the independent
Mhm.
thinker. I think the self starter. I'm curious to know if you've had anything that really gets at that self starter. Some of it just comes through of just like the projects that they've led, and some of the initiatives that they've taken.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've nailed it on the head, if you have some additional insights, but as somebody who does hiring, I'd also be
Yeah.
interested in hearing your thoughts.
I think the one of my future guests coming up wrote a really beautiful article. I saw it on LinkedIn, but she also has a newsletter, and she talked about essentially highlighting on your resume and in person, highlighting the kind of like the freelance things that you've done. And so whether
Yeah,
you've,
that's a good point.
if you've like, you write articles on LinkedIn, you have a blog, you organized committee meetings for something that you have a personal interest in. You were the president of some other society, either
Yeah.
in school or out of school, and so it just kind of shows initiative. Um,
Yes.
or alternatively, and I was going to say this before too, it's important to be willing to toot your own horn. That's something
Oh,
that's kind of quelled in us, right? In
yeah.
graduate school, it's all about the royal we. We did all of this when you're like, nobody else was in the lab at 10:30 at night doing this. That was all me. I
Yeah.
did this, you know. But it's important on a resume to be able to say, like I used to say all the time, I brought this cell type to my mentor's laboratory because we hadn't done any work in this realm before. It was all retina, and I kind of brought the research in from the front of the eye because I needed to find something different than what the postdoc was working on. And I contacted the people to get the cell line. I went down the street, to UIC and learned how to dissect
Yeah.
tissue from, and so you have to be willing to take credit for that. Even if other people, you're trained not to, and other people will tell you like, no, 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 this was a team effort. Of course it is. But when you're in front of people and you're trying to prove that you've got initiative, that's you have to be willing to say, no, I did this and I was
Yeah.
responsible.
As you say that, I'm like, yep, I 100% agree. Those are definitely things to look for. It is, you're right. Everything is always a team effort.
Of course.
We have teams behind us in all of our projects, but it's showing that, like, this is a connection I made. This is something I took. These
Mhm.
are, things that I expanded on or brought to the lab. And also, you mentioned it 100%, like those extracurricular
Yeah.
activities of showing you take initiatives.
Mhm.
We talked about, women in bio. Did you have a role in women in bio? Were you in your graduate student council? Those are not things
Yeah.
we have to do. Those are things that, like,
You
self
should.
starters, people who are really motivated, people who like
Mhm.
leading others, who like leading themselves.
Mhm.
Those are those little bit of extras that people do.
Mhm.
Um, And I know I'm kind of jumping back and forth, but I think we do have to get comfortable in that self-promoting,
Yep.
not just as young scientists, but I think it's a reminder to us even in our everyday careers. It
Absolutely.
is still a team. It is still a team, but we have to highlight the amazing things our teams do. We have to highlight the amazing things that our direct reports do. And it's okay to say, hey, I also had a really good day today. like
Yeah.
I figured something out. And I think sometimes imposter syndrome comes in. That confidence can kind of be a
Totally.
battle. it's
Totally.
it's it's definitely something that I felt throughout my development, but I think it's so important of just like taking time to um, taking time to acknowledge accomplishments, whether it's the whole team, your
Mhm.
direct team, or maybe something that you just did awesome today. Take time
Yeah.
and reflect and be like, that was pretty cool.
Totally.
uh,
Yeah.
I'm gonna lower this, by the way.
Yeah. I've been noticing you've got like the
I
sun
know,
straight
it's
on your
like,
face. So, okay, that's much better. Okay.
yeah.
Um, Now I agree, and I think especially as just continuing professionals, having the extracurriculars is also really important because otherwise, I mean, if you're unsatisfied in your job and you don't want to just do your job and have your
Yeah.
family and that's that, I mean, it's important for fulfillment, but it's also, again, it's good for other resume items. And talking to people who are like, I'm the president of my photography association. That's awesome. Tell me more about that. Or I'm a member of my community symphony, or I do these. I mean, they make for really excellent talking points and things to kind of break the ice in an interview. Not just, it's not just for a professional purpose, but just to kind of ease you in. Because having interesting stories, I think, makes everyone more exciting to talk to.
Oh, I agree. And I think, uh, when you're in your thinking about it from like a career perspective, sometimes I've had some like team members be like, well, how should I continue to develop my skill sets, right? And you
Mhm.
mentioned like those, we were talking about those extracurricular activities, and it's taking on some of those initiatives to influence without authority, right? This
Totally.
is how you grow some of those skill sets so
Yeah.
that you can advance your career. And whether it's inside your organization doing, associate groups or other initiatives that are not part of your daily responsibility, or whether it's in your community or just like hobbies. I
Yeah.
was just talking to somebody last week in our company, and she's also a scientist, would describe herself as an introvert, and she was talking about how she joined an improv class to
Oh, no way.
improve her communication, to get out of her shyness, to get comfortable speaking on her feet and reacting. And I spent a week with her, like
Mhm.
doing this training class, and I can't tell you how many times we came back to that because I'm just like, tell me more. Tell
Yeah.
me more about how you interact with this improv group. Do you put on shows? Like, how does
Yeah.
it feel? Because, like, I'm like, this sounds so fascinating to me, so terrifying to me,
Oh God.
but so fascinating. Like, I mean, I can see the benefits that come out of it. So even
Yeah.
some of those hobbies like outside of work that we do, like those leadership opportunities or those opportunities to just grow and stretch ourselves, going back to the beginning part of our
Completely.
conversation.
Yes.
And I mean, look, she had something interesting and we came back to it several times throughout the week to talk about it.
Oh, cool.
So again, it's what you said, when you share a little bit of yourself with others and you find something interesting,
Yeah.
you just want to keep talking to people about it.
Oh, totally. And what a great place, like Chicago, to learn improv. It's like Chicago and New York are like the improv capitals of the world. So that is incredibly impressive. What a fun
Yeah.
story. Well, Erin Zook, it's been a delight. Is there anything else that you want to leave the listeners with? Any other advice or
I think this has been great. Cynthia, it's been great connecting with you and talking with you again. I think this comes back to how we kind of started the conversation of like the world is small.
totally?
In paths cross again. Here we are years later, catching up, having
Yeah.
conversations, talking about our career, and this is us. This is me still continuing to stretch myself and grow myself and here, be on your podcast, and which is something that I would have never thought I would have done, not because of anything other than when would I have the opportunity. So
Yeah.
I think
And this is a total stretch of my comfort zone too. And it just seemed like something I needed to do. And yeah, it's
yeah,
been
but
amazing.
I think just leaving your listeners with that, of just kind of circling back to that, of continuing to stretch and grow, and remembering that, people come back around. So,
Big time.
just keep the conversations going.
Big time. I totally agree. And how can people find you, Erin, if they want to learn more about BD or building a career in med affairs? Where can they find you?
They can find me on LinkedIn.
Mhm.
I'm always, I get a lot of messages. I'm happy to respond to people. I actually give a lot back to the community. I talk to people who reach out to me on LinkedIn all the time. They ask questions about the company, they ask questions about career. Sometimes they just want to learn more about medical affairs.
Mhm.
Not everybody responds to those messages, but I wish I had somebody who, like, I wish I had those opportunities when I was trying to make the transition. So I
Totally.
try to really respond and give back that way. So happy to, connect with anybody who's interested and out there.
Wonderful. Well, Erin, Dr. Erin Zook, thank you so much for being on the episode. And we appreciate your time.
Thank you. It's been fun.
I want to thank Erin again so much for joining me today. It was just a joy to talk to her. And thanks for listening. See you next time.